Hello. Hi. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Digital Preservation 2019. My name is Sybil Schaefer. I am the Chronopolis Program Manager and Digital Preservation Analyst at the University of California, San Diego. I'd like to thank you all for joining us at this conference in lovely Tampa, Florida. So I'd like to start the conference by recognizing that we have all just either finished up DLF and have our minds bursting with inspiration and ideas, and perhaps a bit of exhaustion at this point in the week. Or alternatively, we finished traveling and dealing with the stresses of getting from there to here. So I'd like to provide everyone with a chance to collectively relax our minds, oxygenate our blood, and focus on being present. If you'll indulge me, please close your eyes softly. We'll take a few collective breaths as we focus on being where we are. So take a deep breath in through the nose. Exhale through the mouth. Relax. Quiet your thoughts. Quiet your mind. Again, deep breath through the nose, out through the mouth. Quiet your mind. One last time, deep breath in through the nose, out through the mouth. Be present. Go ahead and open your eyes. And I'd like to acknowledge last year's keynote speaker, Snowden Becker, for inspiring a repeat of a similar breathing exercise she did last year. I thought it was really excellent at kind of grounding people and focusing on where we are right now. As we begin, I'd like to recognize that we are on native lands and honor the ancestors that have stewarded this land for generations before us. We would be remiss if we did not acknowledge the histories of colonization that have shaped these lands and that have shaped the lives of indigenous peoples on whose lands we now engage. At the DLF and NDSA, we hope that our efforts and goodwill serve the just cause of indigenous people in these lands. A few housekeeping items to start off with. The Wi-Fi and password are listed on this slide. You can also find this information at the registration desk and rotating on slides in individual conference rooms. The Code of Conduct is a key part of this conference and to the DLF and by extension NDSA communities. I recommend you take a look at it if you haven't already. DLF staff are wearing white lanyards should you need them. The all-gender restrooms are available near the Grand Ballroom on the second floor of the hotel. So this is the Grand Ballroom, so they're near here. Anyone is welcome to use them. A note about lanyard colors. They do indicate attendees' photography preferences. Black means that someone is okay with being photographed, although it is always nice to ask them first. And yellow means no photos, please. The photographer is aware of the meaning of the lanyards as well. Community notes are available at bit.ly/2019 DLF. You'll notice that all of the DLF-related events can be found here. If you look in the digital preservation folder, you'll see that it's divided into Wednesday and Thursday. And if you dig deeper into those days, you'll find individual Google Docs for each of the sessions, including this opening plenary. Please use the mic in all of your sessions. We are big about accessibility at this conference, and it helps everybody be able to hear what's going on. Also, this opening plenary is being live streamed, and if you have questions, it's necessary to go to the mics to ask them. That said, if you feel uncomfortable going to the mic for any reason, you can type your question into the shared doc, and a committee member will ask it for you. Please remember to leave a tip for your housekeeping service. Best practices regarding tipping housekeeping include tipping daily, leaving the tip in a noticeable place, and making it obvious that it's a tip and not just some cash that you left lying around. If you're staying in this lovely hotel, look for a tip envelope on your desk. Save your shampoos. At the end of our events, we'll be collecting toiletry donations that will benefit Homeless Helping Homeless, a local emergency shelter provider, and you can drop those off at the registration desk. The online schedule is on Sketch at dlfforum2019.sketch.com. We also have an OSF site for presentation slides, so if you are presenting, please share your slides in OSF. And then lastly, the Twitter is really the best way to get up-to-date conference news and find out what other attendees are thinking and doing. Follow at NDSA2 for NDSA news or DigiPres 19, the DigiPres 19 hashtag for conference-specific tweets. So we would simply not be here about to spend a day and a half talking about digital preservation if it were not for CLEAR and DLF. On behalf of the NDSA, I would like to extend a huge thank you for once again providing us with the administration and support that we need to put this gig on. I would especially like to recognize the work of Aliyah Reich, DLF's program assistant for conferences and events. Aliyah is one of the most courteous, capable, knowledgeable, accommodating people I've ever had the pleasure of working with. There is very little going on at this conference that she has not assisted with in some way. Even when I email her approximately 50 times a day, like I have over the last week, she is always incredibly patient and responsive, and we've been able to do so much more with this conference thanks to her help. Please join me in thanking CLEAR and DLF and Aliyah. There is often a lot of invisible and unrecognized work that goes into organizing a conference. These folks have been volunteering their time over the last 10 months to help make this conference as amazing as it can be. And I'd like to spend a little time highlighting their accomplishments. They have all contributed by suggesting conference themes and potential keynote speakers, reviewing and rating proposals, and will be serving as moderators for upcoming sessions. In particular, I'd like to recognize Heather Barnes and Dan Noonan for writing the call for proposals, Courtney Muma for organizing the closing remarks and delivering them with Stefan El-Nabli, Krista Oldham, and Joe Carano, Seth Anderson, Christian Schuster, Alex Kinnaman, Courtney Muma, and Aliyah Reich all helped schedule and arrange the individual conference sessions. Stefan El-Nabli served as our liaison to the DLF sponsorship committee and helped drum up support for the conferences. The group in charge of welcoming newcomers, which includes organizing today's welcoming breakfast and mentoring program, did a particularly fantastic job. They are Krista Oldham, Joe Carana, David Sorella, and Suzanne Chase. And lastly, thank you to Heather Barnes, who organized and will be chairing the Minute Madness session right before the reception tonight. If you are on the conference committee, please stand up so we can recognize your hard work. Thank you all. And before we move on, I'd like to note that we do an open call for conference committee members each year. Please keep an eye out if you are interested in volunteering next year. I'd now like to recognize our sponsors that not only help keep our registration costs low, but also many of whom provide valuable services that we need to have a thriving digital preservation community of practice. Please visit them when you have a chance. The live stream and recording was provided by Carnegie Mellon University Libraries. The lanyards were provided by Cortex. Our gold sponsors include Aviary, East View Information Services, DCE, LibNova, OCLC, Web of Science Group, Zambera, and Zontal. Our bronze sponsor is the Meta Archive Cooperative, and the DigiPres Coffee Break is sponsored by Digital Bedrock. Please join me in thanking our sponsors. So we made a few changes to the conference this year. We overlapped with DLF for the first time today. Our hope is that this overlap will make it a shorter week for the folks that are attending both DLF and digital preservation. And just to note that there was no reduction in the number of digital preservation sessions, but those attendees were welcome to join the DLF sessions this morning. This morning, we offered a welcome to NDSA and digital preservation breakfast where newcomers were encouraged to join and learn about how to become involved in our organization. We're also changing up the closing a bit this year. Instead of gathering folks back into this room for a closing session that's often skipped by people who need to head to the airport, we're going to offer brief closing remarks and a plus delta exercise to gather some feedback. Speaking of feedback, if you love or hate any of these changes, please let us know. We want to repeat the things you love and not the things that you hate. The last change this year that we have is that we have a vice chair for the first time, Courtney Muma. Courtney had a chance to learn the ropes this year and will be using that knowledge as she takes the reins and chairs Digital Preservation 2020. Critical junctures among people, organizations, and technology are fostered to ensure digital objects persist over time. Junctures can be defined as particular points in time or as the places where things join. This year, the Digital Preservation 2019 Conference Committee invited presentations and workshops that seek to explore these critical junctures. I think it's safe to say that the practice of digital preservation, especially in the United States, is at a critical juncture. In the early winter of this year, we witnessed the sunsetting of what was once a shining star in the digital preservation realm, and was notably a consistent sponsor of this conference. DPEN's final report cited the rise in use and popularity of cloud services as one of the challenging factors the network had to contend with. And it's true. The use of the commercial cloud infrastructure has become not only more acceptable, but in certain organizations, mandated by IT executives who view system administrators as janitors and see no need to maintain storage infrastructure. In contrast, during the same time frame within which DeepIn sunsetted, Amazon Web Services was valued at $400 billion and is estimated to have about 50% of the commercial cloud storage market. DeepIn's failure causes us to ask, is it possible for us to leverage our collaborative resources to sustain community-based services? Thankfully, there are efforts underway to help ensure that there remains an alternative to commercial services, like the Invest in Open Infrastructure initiative. As the statement in support of Invest in Open Infrastructure states, by investing in, integrating, building on, and/or expanding current and emerging open infrastructure initiatives, we can ensure that the services and software that the scholarly community relies upon to share its work with all who need access is high quality, reliable, persistently available, and operated in a manner consistent with our community's values. In a recent blog post, Catherine Skinner asks, why are so many scholarly communication infrastructure providers running a Red Queen's race? In other words, why are we running faster and faster only to find where we've arrived in the same place we've begun? The success or failure of such ventures like the Open Infrastructure Initiative will determine if we move forward in providing sustainable community-based alternatives for digital preservation, or if we keep running a Red Queen's race, succumbing eventually to the cheap buy-in pricing only a monopoly can offer. Now more than ever, we need to be selective about what we preserve. There is an environmental cost to digital preservation, whether it is the mining of precious metals used in electronic components or the energy needed to cool rack space. This environmental cost can no longer be ignored. In addition, while we've been relatively fortunate to experience the cost of storage declining as the size of our stewarded materials has increased, advances in storage technology have slowed. The amount of data being produced is increasing, but storage costs are not decreasing. To meet these constraints, we need to focus on appraisal and selections of materials, and do so in a way that balances the cost of preserving with the cost of losing the history of those who can't afford to pay. Carol Mandel's recently released chapter asking, "Can we do more?" In Carol Mandel's recently released chapter asking, "Can we do more?" she states that prior to the establishment of special collections and archives as we know them today, quote, "The survival of archival records depended upon the level of care and attention given to them by their parent organization, and as such, they were typically no less ephemeral than the organizations that created them," end quote. I posit that this is largely where we stand today. In addition to selecting carefully, we need to encourage digital preservation practices to sprout outside of our individual institutions and within communities and families whose heirlooms and treasures now take digital form, so that the historical record does not remain dominated by the few who hold the most resources. Another sign that we are at a critical juncture for digital preservation is one occurring in my own institution. Libraries are becoming more service-oriented and less about the collections that they own. I am in no way bemoaning the fact that supporting student success is a high priority for my library. It definitely should be. But I am cognizant of the fact that digital preservation lies adjacent to services for students in the financial pie chart. As Carol Mandel states from the aforementioned chapter, this is a welcome and well-deserved golden age for libraries and their users, but it is not an age where acquisition and preservation define the library. Digital preservation work is already notoriously underfunded. How will we fare as we face additional competition for scarce resources? There's always talk about sharing failures as a means to underscore the importance of the work we do. This idea that a list of terrible failures will help illustrate the importance of digital preservation and secure buy-in and additional resource allocation from our respective organizations. I'd like us to reflect on what it means to define our field by what can go wrong versus what can go right. While a list of serious fails illustrates what can go wrong, we also need to start defining what success looks like. This is a really difficult thing to do when success may only be determinable years into the future, not only beyond our career spans, but beyond our lifespans. I would gather that success looks less like an OAIS diagram and more like an educated, motivated, and diverse community of practice. Meredith Farkas wrote a series of blog posts recently, exploring what mid-career feels like for her and how her work perspective has changed. One line that struck me from her writing was her statement, "I want to be a good ancestor." I think that's ultimately why we're all here. We want to be good ancestors, not only for our descendants, but for all the people who are born into this world years after we've departed, and who are curious about what humanity was like during our time and how we navigated this critical juncture. My partner and I share a curiosity about language and the definitions of words, and through his querying of my use of certain words, I discovered that I apparently have a tendency to use the second listed definition of a word. My hunch is that this is related to building a vocabulary through reading rather than through conversation, because I also have a tendency to be unsure of the pronunciations of words as if I were hearing or saying them for the first time. So it should have been no surprise to me when, in discussing the theme with my conference committee, there was some confusion on my articulation of the term juncture, which is not just a particular point in events or time, but according to the second definition, a place where things join. And it's here in the luxury of the second definition that I invite you to enjoy this conference as a place where you are joined with your community of fellow preservationists, forming a critical juncture of your own as you face what's on the horizon and tackle the work of being a good ancestor. We are fortunate to have many talks that touch on the aspects of the critical junctures I just mentioned, and I've highlighted a few of them here. Thank you. So one of my favorite things about the NDSA community is that we've always been excellent at recognizing and awarding those in the field who are doing fantastic work. This year is no different. Here to present the 2019 NDSA Awards, Innovation Awards, are the co-chairs of the Innovation Awards Committee, Stephen Abrams from Harvard University and Krista Oldham from Clemson University.
Thank you, Sybil. Good afternoon, everyone. As you will probably recall, the NDSA established its Innovation Awards back in 2011 to recognize and to encourage innovation in the field of digital stewardship. Since that time, we have honored 34 exemplary individuals, institutions, projects, educators, and future stewards for their fantastic efforts in ensuring the ongoing validity and accessibility of our collective, indeed the world's, valuable digital heritage. Today, we add to that honor roll with 4 new awardees. However, before introducing them, I'd like to briefly acknowledge my colleagues on the awards working group, co-chair Krista Oldham, Samantha Abrams, no relation, no nepotism, from Ivy Plus, Lauren Goodley from Texas State, Greta Graff from Yale, and Carrie May from University of Pittsburgh. I'm sure you could all appreciate how difficult it is to try to choose between the many, many worthy nominations that we received. And while I won't say that it was an easy task, it turned out to be a very enjoyable one. The group just did a fantastic job. And also echoing Sybil, we would also very much like to recognize the just enormous help that Alia has given us, the whole group, throughout the awards process. So please join me in thanking everyone for making all of this happen. And now we can move on to our honorees, who will be presented to you by Krista.
Good afternoon. The NDSA Individual Innovation Award honors individuals making significant innovative contributions to the digital preservation community. Today we recognize 2 individuals. Our first is Dinesh Katra. Dr. Dinesh Katra has established a distinguished record leading the development of innovative technological solutions for digital preservation, trustworthy digital repository certification, data repurposing, and intelligent archiving. Katra currently serves as Senior Director and Head of the Department of Human-Centered Design and Computing Group at the Center for Development of Advanced Computing in India. Over the last several years, he has worked to advocate for, developed, and deployed the Indian National Digital Preservation Program and its constituent systems and services. The program provides a very robust and comprehensive platform for the effective long-term preservation of digital materials so critical to contemporary and future commerce, cultural science, entertainment, and education. As chief investigator of the program's flagship project to establish a Center for Excellence for Digital Preservation, Dr. Katra led the process to develop a digital preservation standard for India, as well as domain-specific archival systems and automation tools for digital preservation. He also conceptualized, designed, and led the development of Digitale, a software framework which comprehensively implements the OAIS reference model. Digitale has been customized for preservation of electronic office records, audiovisual and document archives, as well as e-government records. Katra's efforts also facilitated the introduction of the ISO 16363 standard to India, culminating in the first repository in the world to achieve ISO 16363 certification. His achievements exemplified the growing international reach of our concerns and practice in the areas of digital stewardship and preservation. Our second individual awardee was unfortunately not able to make it due to some last-minute travel issues, but we are honoring him here today anyway, and that person is Tim Walsh. Tim Walsh is a digital archivist and preservation librarian with varied experiences at Harvard, Tufts, the University of Wyoming, and currently Concordia University. He is also a prolific software developer, and this capacity has created and made freely available through his BitArchivist website and GitHub an evolving suite of robust open source tools, meeting many core needs of the stewardship community in appraising, processing, and reporting upon born digital collections. His projects include the Brunhilde characterization tool, bulk reviewer for identifying PII and other sensitive information, the METS Flask viewer for Archivematica METS files, scope and access interface for Archivematica dissemination information packages, and the CAA tool for creating submissions packages from a variety of folder and disk image sources. Taken together, these tools support a wide gamut of both technical and curatorial activities. The open availability, documentation, support, and community engagement for the growing ecosystem of mature preservation tools is critical to the success and sustainable stewardship of digital materials so critical to the contemporary and future commerce, again, cultural, science, entertainment, and education. Tim's work also provides an excellent example of how a lone individual can nevertheless make a substantial positive impact on the complex domain of stewardship practices through dedication, skill, enthusiasm, and community. And again, he apologizes for not being able to make it, but life happens. So let's thank him for his work. The NDSA Organization Innovation Award honors organizations taking an innovative approach to providing support and guidance to the digital preservation community. Today we are recognizing two organizations. The first one is the Asociación Iberoamericana de Preservación Digital, or I'm going to now refer to it as APRDIG, because I cannot probably pronounce all that again in a succinct way. APRDIG is a nonprofit Ibero-American foundation founded at the end of 2017 in Barcelona, Spain, with the intention of promoting the importance of digital preservation in Latin America and Spain. Its activities have culminated in projects and activities to disseminate the importance of levels in digital preservation and bring Spanish translations of the original NDSA levels matrix to Spanish-speaking institutions. Led by Dr. Miguel Termens and Dr. Leah, this group of volunteers, researchers, and disseminators of best practices for digital preservation have created an online self-assessment tool to help institutions of Spain and Mexico understand recommendations, key concepts, and simple diagnosis of digital preservation practices using the NDSA level matrix as guidelines. The awards panel eagerly recognizes the work of OPRADIG in translating the NDSA levels of preservation into Spanish, opening up significant new opportunities for expanding digital stewards, best practices, and subsequent outcomes by practitioners in Spain and Latin America. The critical importance of effective and sustainable solutions for preserving digital materials transcends institutional and national boundaries. OPRADIG's efforts are a vital example of the growing international reach and stewardship of preservation concerns and applications. Furthermore, they evidence the positive contributions to local and global understanding resulting from the expansion of the community of theory and practice to all interested and engaged participants. Also, unfortunately, due to travel considerations, neither Dr. Temens or Leah were able to join us, but please let's recognize them in their absence. Thank you. I forgot to press the button. Our second organization that we'd like to recognize is SPN, or Software Preservation Network. The idea for a software preservation network first arose in 2014. Since then, it has developed into a vibrant grassroots organization of digital preservation practitioners invested in the future of software preservation. Through multiple federal grants and startups and seed funding, SPN has solidified alliances among international stakeholders, both individuals and organizations with diverse perspectives, including libraries, archives, and museums. Two separate but complementary aspects of SPN's work are particularly noteworthy. First, its innovative efforts to develop effective techniques and programs for long-term stewardship of the intermediating software upon which preserved digital resources are inextricably dependent, exemplified by an investigation into applicability of fair use doctrine, the Code of Best Practices for Fair Use in Software Preservation, as well as the EASY project research into scalable emulation as a service infrastructure. The second, the critical emphasis placed on issues of community engagement and organizational sustainability. This work provides an extremely useful case study to the stewardship community of the importance of thoughtful and iterative self-reflection and refinement of organizational strategies, goals, and processes. And innovatives to ensure the continued relevance, value, and persistence of programmatic efforts. SPN offers a model for digital stewardship that combines steadfast vision with flexibility and an emphasis on the evolving needs of an organization's constituents. The award is accepted today on behalf of the entire SPN organization and its members by Jessica Meyerson of Educopia Institute and Zach Val of California Polytechnic State University, who have played key leadership roles in its success. This time I remembered. The NDSA Project Innovation Award honors projects whose goals or outcomes represent an inventive, meaningful addition to the understanding or processes required for successful, sustainable digital preservation stewardship. And today we are honoring the Great Migration Home Movie Project, which is part of the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. Since its inception in 2016, the Great Migration Home Movie Project has digitized hundreds of hours of African American home movies and thousands of photographs for families who have visited the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture, and for those who live across the country in Baltimore, Denver, and Chicago. In its current iteration, families visiting the museum are invited to drop off their home movies and films, videotapes, and audio tapes when they arrive for the day, and then pick up their originals and digital copies preserved by a team of professionals at the end of the day, with the added invitation to donate digital copies to the museum, enriching its growing collection of vernacular home movies. As explained by Walter Frostberg, founding director of the National Museum of African American History and Culture's Media, Conservation, and Digitization Department, the Great Migration Home Movie Project lowers the technological barrier to entry of audiovisual digitization and directly and proactively addresses the historic exclusion of people of color from traditional archives. It is thanks to the work of the Great Migration Home Movie Project that not only these memories can be gifted back to families and their future descendants, but also that history is being rewritten in a very real and immediate way. This award is being accepted on behalf of the entire Great Migration Home Movie Project by Candace Ming. We did not receive any nominations this year in the Educator or Future Steward categories, so that brings us to the end of the awards. Please take the opportunity to meet with our awardees later on to offer your personal congratulations, but in the meantime, let's join one last time in thanking all of our winners.
You may or may not be aware that over the last year or so, the NDSA Coordinating Committee has been undergoing strategic planning initiatives. Here to discuss these initiatives in greater detail is the chair of the NDSA Coordinating Committee, Bradley Daigle from the University of Virginia and AP Trust.
Thanks, Sybil. I would like to extend my welcome to everyone as well, and I'm looking forward to the next day and a half with you all. So just a quick note, some of you who are at the breakfast this morning heard some of this, but I want to talk a little bit about the work that the NDSA has been doing, in particular the NDSA leadership. And the NDSA leadership is comprised of the top part of the pyramid on which the NDSA membership itself, which is you all, sits. So the leadership is comprised of the co-chairs of the working groups and interest groups, as well as the nominated and elected coordinating committee members. So over the past year, I just have to initially say thank you to the leadership group, because we have been nose to the grindstone, however you want to, whatever metaphor you want to insert, but we've been doing strategic planning, like almost ad nauseum, just trying to get coordination among all these groups. And so I'm going to talk about three particular elements in which the strategic planning has been manifested, and you see them on the screen behind me. The first is membership, you. So our membership continues to grow. We are now hovering at around 250 members, which I think is fantastic. Let me just repeat, we're at around 250 members. So that is an absolute amazing number, and it continues to grow. We've had more members join us in 2019. I'll give you their names at the end of the slide to build the suspense. But the memberships keep coming in. So that is a sign of organizational health. And the work that each of these members bring and the new voices is a critical part for us moving forward. As far as governance goes, there's the perennially quotable Cliff Lynch said this in a meeting recently, is governance is expensive. And he's absolutely right. So we're trying to make our governance a little more lightweight, to provide a bit more transparency, durability, and consistency. So those are the key elements in what we're doing and from a governance perspective. So hopefully most of you have seen the documents that were shared early in the fall in September related to our principles, our new coordinating committee expectations, and various other documents. They are linked in the shared minutes. I'm not going to give you quick bit.ly links that make you scramble to look them up. If you go into the shared minutes, they're all there. So this updated documentation has helped us also to realize where we need to change and what we need to adapt as we grow. And part of that is thinking about our growing global perspective and how that's being manifested in the work we're doing. We had a nice semantic discussion about the word national in National Digital Stewardship Alliance, and what does that mean for a growing global community. These conversations are ongoing, and we would certainly love to have your individual voices contribute to them. So at any point, if you have opinions, please share them. We have also released the initial version of the NDSA agenda, the long-awaited agenda, and it is now open for public comment. So the link again is in the shared minutes. Have a look, and we certainly would love to hear your feedback before it's officially published later in the calendar year. But that's one of the critical publications that the NDSA provides for our profession. Finally, the final part is engagement. That's you. So I like to repeat this. I like to repeat it often. You are the NDSA. The coordinating committee is a bunch of people, the working groups are a bunch of people, but collaboratively speaking, in toto, it is you that is the NDSA. So I will amplify what Sybil has said. We need your feedback, both on this conference, what you want this conference to be, how it can best meet your needs, how you think the NDSA should work globally as a global partner with other entities, thinking about how we manifest our professional development, whether it's through other conferences like IPRES, PASIG, whether it's through collaborations, what should those be? Hearing from you is a key part of that work. So the other part would be our actual work. The working groups and interest groups rely on engaged members like yourselves. We're in the process of revising some of those groups, and we would really love to benefit from new voices, continued voices, and each of you, if you see that there's interest, please join the working groups. You will be hearing this clarion call going out repeatedly, as we would love to have your voice in those groups to help shape how we're thinking about the profession moving forward. Finally, I just want to repeat, when we're thinking about what the NDSA means, we're changing all the time. Digital preservation is an iterative and a mutable profession. Having you involved in it, having you come to this conference, having you think about our strategic planning and providing feedback so that we're adapting to your needs is the most critical piece. So in that, I will show you now the new members for this year. I want to thank you all so I can read them off to you because it's awesome. University of Miami Libraries. We have the University of Cincinnati Libraries, LibNova, University of Connecticut Library, University of Washington Libraries, Louisville Libraries, Balearic Islands, and Colorado Boulder. So as you can see from that, we're starting to get more international members, more people interested in what we're doing. What does that mean for us as an entity, as a growing body? So thank you to the new members. If you are not a new member, who here is not a member? Well, who here is a member of NDSA? I'll do it positively. I'm learning. Awesome. So for those of you who aren't sure or didn't put your hands up, think about what membership means. It's a very easy form. We only ask a few questions, a pint of blood, and maybe a social security number or two, but otherwise it's a very easy process. But bringing you into these conversations, I think, is a much more critical piece. Second question, who attended IPRES this year? Not as many hands. Okay. So again, thinking about what the conferences mean, both here in the States, North America, Europe, Global South, other areas where we should be reaching into preservation communities, please help us think about that going forward. Otherwise, I will get out of the way for our keynote.
Thank you, Bradley. I am very excited to introduce our keynote speaker next. Alison Langmead holds a joint faculty appointment at the University of Pittsburgh between the Dietrich School of Arts, between the Dietrich School of Arts and Sciences and the School of Computing and Information. At the Dietrich School of Arts and Sciences, Langmead serves as the director of the Visual Media Workshop, a digital humanities lab focused on the investigation of material and visual culture, historical or contemporary. At the School of Computing and Information, she teaches courses on digital preservation and the digital humanities. In her research, she designs and produces digital humanities projects that investigate visuality and materiality as multivalent interactive processes. She also studies the practice of digital sustainability as a complex, transformative ecosystem that informs our understanding of the role of historical information in our contemporary digitality. Langmead is the principal contact for the DHRX, Digital Humanities at Pitt Faculty Research Initiative, which represents a transdisciplinary network of scholars who use the digital methods to study the ways in which humans interact with their environments. She holds a PhD in medieval architectural history from Columbia University, as well as an MLIS from the University of California, Los Angeles. Please join me in welcoming Alison.
Looks like me, huh? Thank you, Sybil, very much for that kind introduction, and thank you all for coming out to hear the plenary today. I am indeed going to speak about sustainability and preservation in relationship to the Socio-Technical Sustainability Roadmap that we run out of the VMW, the Visual Media Workshop, and also just some things that I've noticed along the way. Perhaps to many of you, this sentence seems tautological or obvious, but I'm going to try in my little less than an hour here to present my particular take, which centers on the role of the centralization of institutional resources and the increasing technical professionalization within what has become an interdependent, network-fueled environment of dramatically increasing diversity of both stakeholders and record types. I was able to go to a number of talks this morning, and there was a lot of discussion around these issues, and Sybil brought some up in her opening remarks to this plenary, so I hope we can have a wide-ranging conversation about what it means to be institutionally based and yet desiring to reach out into communities. So, if I can, I would like to just start with some principles of preservation. We all know what they are, maybe, but I feel like I should bring some up in terms of that I would like to use just so that we can be on the same page. And I'm going to use Trevor Owens' digital preservation axioms as a bit of a framing device. I've picked out three. And the first one is, Trevor asserts, quite rightly, that institutions make preservation possible. He has 15 total axioms, and I'm sure many of you know what they are, and they're all fantastic. So I'm just pulling out three today. This is echoed by any number of people in our community. This is the Ithaca report that came out last year that says, historically, archives, national libraries, and research libraries have assumed a leadership role in stewardship. It's about long-term access to cultural heritage materials. All good. But Chris Rusbridge back in 2006, and I've also noted today that there's a lot of people quoting the late 90s and the mid-2000s like they're eons ago, but they do feel like that, don't they? Where he noted this, in practice, the largest risk to digital preservation is indeed money. Who has the resources to make a 100-year digital preservation promise, and who can make an investment case with a 100-year return? And the answer to that, historically, also rightly, is institutions. For digital creators, however, this institution-focused approach often means that digital preservation is, quote unquote, somebody else's job, namely y'all's job, in part my job, somebody else's job foisted out into the distance. It looks like this. I love this, this image from Ben Feener-Radin's article about It Takes a Village. There used to be a vine associated with this. I can no longer play the vine. Irony. But to many, this is what digital preservation looks like, large old computers with restoration in progress. And frankly, sometimes, as you well know, it does. So perhaps that might be, however, this is an article that I just recently read that just came out in Digital Humanities Quarterly, and they note the following, which I find to be quite poignant. So forgive me if I'll read this quote as well. The spirit of 1990s cyber utopianism, which assumed electronic media would be cheap and technically straightforward to maintain, that may or may not be true, and that libraries would develop subscription models to be able to support bespoke non-commercial projects, held back proactive funding of archive and sustainability initiatives. And in part, Sybil brought up Deepan's sunsetting earlier, and this is a good example of the ways that for a variety of reasons, from not enough subscriptions to not enough deposits to any sort of socio-technical reason that you can come up with, the actual institutional force behind subscription services has had a rocky start. It has proven difficult to address the wicked problems, as Carol Mendel called them this morning from the longstanding social scientific discussion of wicked problems. It has proven difficult to address the wicked problems of digital preservation institutionally. Indeed, the sorts of institutions that sometimes folks from the outside see to be more successful include things like Archive Team, this sort of pseudo-institution that's going out pell-mell and doing things. It is focused on some of the same principles, perhaps, as the folks in this room, but few of the same practices. So here is the second of Trevor's axioms I'd like to bring to your attention. 12. Highly technical definitions of digital preservation are complicit in silencing the past. And the way that digital preservation is indeed discussed is highly technical and technical language, as it is and should be, and for good reason, especially in institutional settings where the pressure is high. But I'm with Trevor, it has negative ramifications as well. We use terms like authenticity, integrity, reliability, fixity, accuracy, and if any of my students from Pitt are up here, yes, I did grab this from my digital preservation class lecture slides. I teach these things one after another as terms of art. We talk about adequacy of performance, authenticity of data, significant properties, all the way down through technical concerns like operating performance, as befits our professional training. We use professional models, such as this process-based model, which shows preparing for a migration test. We have preservation metadata ontologies and standards that look like this from the premise documentation. We have preservation reference models like this from the OAIS documentation. We have even more detailed looks into the reference models for OAIS. This is just the ape, right? This is just the archival information package, all the way down to my favorite square on this whole diagram. It says bit. It won't surprise you to hear that sometimes if you ask even myself, where is the thing in this model? It's almost impossible to answer. How do you point to the thing? What is it that we are doing? We all know what we're doing. This isn't an OAS bashing session at all. It is just incredibly technical and complicated, and getting into understanding this world is has an incredibly high barrier to entry. Indeed, it's worth noting, this is another quote from some colleagues you may know, it is worth noting that in the absence of a demanding clientele or stakeholder community, the Trusted Digital Repository standard does not seem to be widely adopted. Forgive me, I guess, for saying this bluntly, and I just sort of mean it this way. We create standards that we find hard to implement. So, why are we so demanding in our practices? If we ourselves don't do them unless demanding stakeholders require it, or we have strong support to do so. And I'd like to put it to you, I'm making good on my abstract. I brought a lot of the sentences from the abstract in here so I can make the connection. Traditional preservation practices and standards assume, and in some cases require, unchanging fixity for preserved digital products for an indefinite period into the future. I would like us all to consider having sympathy for this group about how huge a job that is. That is an amazing, unbelievable burden to take on a community. And it is difficult to do. It is important to do. But sometimes, and I felt this way this morning, there was a lot of discussion about, I tweeted about this, about caring and worrying. This group does a lot of worrying, and I think it's worth, in the spirit of breathing deeply, recognizing the pressure that we place on ourselves to do what it is that we do. What that implies is that there's a number of tacit and explicit professional assumptions that the digital preservation community has on itself. And again, except for the last one, these are common archival principles that carry over quite easily. There's valuation and appraisal. And by that I mean, we have to decide as a group what, in institutionally based digital preservation techniques, we need to decide what deserves preservation. Is it cultural, historical, and scientific heritage? It will, of course, depend on the institution and their collections policy. It will depend on any number of things there. Is it infrastructural projects? Is it the ones that somehow seem more fundamental to the structure of the network digital infrastructure than others? Whose heritage? Whose infrastructure? I've heard this over and over all day and in talks this year. This is a stressful job. These are distressful choices. They lead to the second group of tacit and explicit assumptions, which is who takes care of things and whose responsibility is for it to take care of things. This is a easily enough long-standing issue in the digital realm as well as the paper-based realm. Our networked digital infrastructure makes ownership or custody, at best, complicated. As Trevor said this morning, and I thought this was fantastic, who's looking after the Kickstarter papers? What even are the Kickstarter papers? It can be very difficult to even describe the relationship between the paper-based world and the real world. In fact, going off script, I would go ahead and put out there that we talk a lot about the ways we bring our old, the ways we transform and change our old ways of doing things in the paper-based world into the digital world, as if that is something that can be stretched. I put it to you now that in 2019, it seems ever more clear that the digital change didn't just transform our information ecosystem, it broke it. And it broke it deeply and essentially. And we feel it as a pain. Responsibility has then ethical and economic burdens. It is a difficult, difficult thing to do. And our technological and administrative structures are there to help us navigate this minefield. To bring it back to Chris Rusbridge. In practice, it's about money. It's about making a 100-year promise. It's about making a 100-year return. We should all be so lucky to live 100 years, much less 100 years of our working life. This is an amazing thing to do, and it is almost relentless. Here's the third one and the last one of the assumptions, and this is the one I sort of want to emphasize a little bit more because it isn't one that I teach in Archives 101 either. Diversity actually pushes back on the utility of infrastructures held in common. That is to say, communal infrastructures necessarily involve compromise and the assumption that we're talking about one type of thing, and I don't literally mean one type of thing when I'm talking here. Anytime you need to have something held in common, you are making a model of the world that will exclude something. And the diversity of the networked ecosystem pushes back on that, and I mean that actively. I mean, diversity pushes back on institutions, diversity actively pushes back on standardization. And that is also then to say, diversity effectively, accurately, and thankfully is pushing back on the role that standards actually play in our practice. What is it that standards have been doing to us throughout our time as stewards and as digital preservationists? Diversity tests our assumptions about what standards are are 4. If digital preservation is the best approach at the level of institution, therefore, must it produce something, I can't find a better phrase for this right now, I really apologize to the people who invited me here, but a compromise in the commons, a compromise of the commons. I'm mixing my metaphors, but institutions and standards are a form of compromise, a form of effective compromise. Life is compromise, and yet, generalized formalisms are never universally successfully normative. They simply aren't. They can't be. And in fact, it might be worth saying that they only ever work in the precise conditions that they were actually produced. So maybe even in time. OAIS is a good example. As people keep changing it and moving it throughout time, it moves and shifts and changes. It's one of the most successful models, but it's also one of the most abstract models, right? Teaching OAIS to a bunch of young LAS students is a bit like telling them there's no reality. It is a way of thinking more than a way of doing. So, in the land of the creator, responsibilities of working with digital things can look a little bit different than this burdensome scenario that I'm placing as a possible affective way to view the responsibility of digital preservation right now. Down at the level of the individual actor or team, the people who are producing the documents, the texts, the files, the programs, the objects, the bits that we are also concerned with, rightfully. What is it like for them to work with the machines? Why would they need to take preservation actions? They ask questions like, what is a computer for? What does it do? What purposes does it serve? Who's in charge here? And to a certain extent, it's at this intersection between what creators ask about what they're doing with computers and what digital preservation professionals would like to have done with their work over a 100-year return, over a 100-year lifespan, is that we say this, which is a truism that I say all the time, and it's just, I'm sure there's somebody I could cite for it, but personal computers have made us our own typists, our own typesetters, our own record keepers, and in that way, we might consider that they have made each and every single one of us, each and every single digital record creator, they have made them their own digital preservation professional. The question is, do you know what you're doing? Is your preservation, is your notion of the future rowing in the same direction as your notion of the present? To this end, the Visual Media Workshop team started to think about sustainability as a way to discuss the fact that not every project creator will have the same 100-year return approach that a digital preservation professional might, but they will have some need to sustain their work because that is the way human beings create meaning. So what is the way that we could actually talk to them about it with not as teaching them how to do digital preservation, but working with them to sort of figure out how they could maintain their work more successfully in the short term and maybe even perhaps on the timescales that the professionals in this room need to do this. The creators really know what they're doing. And we need to figure out a way to respect them critically, essentially, and deeply. It leads me to Trevor's third digital preservation axiom for today. Nothing has been preserved. There are only things being preserved. Another oldie but goodie from Brian Lavoie here. This is something that we have known forever and ever. Successful digital preservation is not just about technical solutions. Rather, it is a confluence of preservation strategies, user expectations, organizational commitments, and economic solutions that will ensure digital materials persist through the next technology cycle and beyond. And we wanted to bring this approach out to digital humanities practitioners. But we worried that bringing things like this out to them along the same lines of someone else's job would be, this is my job, but not one I signed up for. Please be gone with these added needs. Please don't trouble me with these added concerns about longevity. But we sort of went on, whose job is it to preserve blogs and online discussion forums? Whose job is it? Is it the people in this room, or is it the people who made it? I think this is a complicated conversation. Are infrastructural and important projects the only ones worthy of sustaining or sustenance? I actually go back and forth about what the larger scale noun is for sustainability. Sustenance like food, sustaining like a note, I guess. The answer here is, of course, no. But the types of decisions that institutions must make hinge on questions like this. Institutions cannot preserve everything. Institutions cannot preserve everything. Is it our mandate to preserve everything? No. So therefore, the valuation and appraisal assumption abides. How do we make these decisions? It's stressful. This is all then, therefore, to say sustainability is hard work, and we're all in this together. To this end, we produced the Socio-Technical Sustainability Roadmap. I'm sure there are graduates in this room. We took it around the country this last year to 7 locations around the United States. And my colleagues Aisling Quigley and Chelsea Gunn, you can see their Twitter handles there on the screen, and I were the team that did the majority of the writing and the presenting throughout the year. Please visit. I want to take you through it briefly. This isn't a lecture on the STSR. That's the abbreviation we call it, the STSR. This isn't a lecture on the STSR, but I can give you a quick overview of what it is. And then for the people who participated in it, and for people who wish to participate in it, at the end I'm going to be giving you the findings that we will be turning into the NEH in just a month. So the findings of this experiment of taking sustainability practices out into the field, we think we're done for now. Section A of, I should back up and say one thing. So the STSR, for people not familiar with it, it was designed to be a self-led workshop. If you go to sustainingdh.net, I can go back. If you go to sustainingdh.net, you'll see a delightful WordPress website that we wrote and designed in a color we call Digital Preservation Teal. And it is designed to be a self-led workshop that creators can pick up and run on their own, that takes them through the steps of sustaining their work. The Section A is secret project management. It has a number of modules that proactively we found there is a big gap out in the field of people knowing how to simply manage large-scale or even medium-scale digital projects. And so in Section A, we take the participants through a number of exercises, from defining their user communities to learning how they manage their records to figuring out their significant properties, which is a word that might make the ears of the audience perk up a bit. There are 2, I'll get into this a little bit later, but there are at least two highly technical digital preservation terms from OAS and CEDARS, for people who remember all these things, that get worked in here. We took it on ourselves to integrate, I'll get into this more in a bit, a lot more professional digital preservation terminology into these modules. But the work of Section A is secret project management. Again, I don't lie. This is from the abstract. Sustainability planning flourishes best when the fluid, changing nature of contemporary digital practices and the products are accepted and the possibility of a project retirement date is assumed. This is a change that we made. Clearly I did a lot of rhetorical setting up to get to this point here today, but if institutional practices are designed for a 100-year investment and a 100-year return, it's harder to turn that ship of state to the left or the right. Sustainability, instead, sustainability planning for creators does a better job when you're able to turn and wheel quickly based on the changing infrastructure that people see around them. Contemporary digital practices are fluid, to say the least, and this our approach to project management emphasizes that. Section B is about really seeing how many people it takes to run a project. The work of Section B, you are asked to list every single person that is on your team and what they do for the project. That is Module B1. In Module B2, you're asked to list every single technology that you use on your project and its role on your project and how long you have it funded for. This includes things like GitHub. And to say the least, it is a shocking thing to ask a group of 40 or 50 digital humanists or digital stewards or information professionals to physically write down, my project relies on a technology that is funded at the pleasure of Microsoft. If Microsoft decides to take it away, there goes my project. So we map then the people on the project and the technologies on the project, and we see how long each of them are funded. If you have people who are not funded for as long as the technologies that you need them, you see that you have a sustainability red flag. Not a problem, but a sustainability red flag. Again, from the abstract. For sustainability practices to be successful, project leaders must keep the changing, socially contingent nature of both their project and their working environments consistently in mind as they initiate, maintain, and support your own work. And I can draw your attention here not only to the fact that I'm just talking about constant turnover, which is the actual lived experience of the vast majority of the digital creators we interacted with when taking this out into the field. It's actually, here I can also emphasize the notion of initiation, maintaining, and supporting their own work, because that is what the work of sustainability, that is what the work of preservation, quote unquote, often looks like to the creator. It is meshed into their need to actually say something real and out loud for people, to integrate their forward-thinking process about preservation into their workaday efforts to say something important, I think, is the critical means by which we will be able to push preservation practices forward. It has to mean something to the creators as they're doing the thing that they're doing, not an add-on. I wouldn't even say integrative, which is, I think, something else that Trevor brought up this morning. I would say it needs to match. It needs to literally match and support them. It needs to support what it is that they're doing now. Section C is to introduce the very basics of digital preservation to them, actual proactive professional level digital preservation practices, which I will go into specifically here because they use the NDSA levels for that. Again, this is the mismatch that this is trying to sort of entail, that we posited and then found was true. For users to take up digital preservation practices, and here I put in parentheses these institution-centric digital preservation practices, they must significantly modify workflows and goals, which means that they also need to be able to abstract from our practices and see how it works for them, which is, it's not that they can't do that. Clearly, they're incredibly intelligent people. It's that we're placing the burden of understanding us on them rather than offering what we have to say in a way that they can understand it proactively. And the results of this are either they don't do it, or they find it impractical, or they find that it isn't for them, and then it doesn't get embedded in their practice. We wanted to find a way to embed it in their practice, and we adapted the NDSA levels of preservation for this. If you go to sustainingdh.net and go to Section C, you can see it yourself, but I will present it also to you now. So why the NDSA levels? Well, this is clear enough. We insisted on basing our work on professional grade approaches. How are we going to make these approaches seem functionally useful in the ongoing work of producing digital projects? And the NDSA levels are by far the most legible of them. There is, frankly, nothing like seeing your own professionalization just slap you straight in the face when you say, oh, well, we're going to be able to explain, pick a term. Designated communities is one that I'm going to use in a second. We're going to be able to explain designated communities, no problem. And then you start to try. It's the depth of the amount of technical knowledge that is represented by the people in this room is amazing. So it was real work adapting what it is that I teach in the classroom and perform by the wayside, and what it is that we thought creators could actually bona fidely take into their process. So, just for this group, here is a slide of one of the things that we had to do, which is change almost every single name of the levels. Whereas the NDSA has a level, the 2016 added level access. When we read through what access was asking of the preservation community, it seemed a lot easier to tweak that as in usability. The way that creators could take their need to make a usable product and work access into that, and I'll go into specifically how we did access in a moment, seemed to work for us. I'm an archivist, I'm a trained archivist. We don't talk about backing things up per se, because the slippage between archiving and backing up is a painful one indeed professionally. However, out there in the field, people need to back their work up. And the NDSA level about storage and geographic location is in its own way about backing up your work. And so that transition was relatively straightforward for us. Security became permissions, metadata became metadata. Metadata is another one of those words that is easy to think you can explain and then much more difficult to do in practice. And then fixity simply became data integrity, which is what fixity means. So, here is how we adapted access. I could go through them all if you like, and I'm happy to take questions about the way we adapted the other ones. But access to me brings up a lot of the major concerns that we found in the field, and will lead a little bit closer into the findings. I'm sorry this is so small, but I will attempt to use the pointer, excellent, to make my point. So this is the new 2016 edition of Access, right? It was posted on the Signal at the Library of Congress. And up here you see determine designated community, yeah? And then over here, however, there's a discussion of submission information packages, SIPs, and archival information packages, APEs, all those OAIS terms, yeah? It is, even though it's a chart with a whole bunch of very brief phrases, there is a universe of technical digital preservation knowledge embedded, rightly so, in the NDSA levels of preservation. And so and then there's these great definitions down here, what a designated community is, what a SIP is, representation information, even farther down into the OAIS reference model. So what Aisling, Chelsea, and I did is we decided which of these large-standing concepts we wanted to focus on, because we weren't going to be able to focus on them all, and which did we want to embed into the STSR as a way of building both linguistic, meaning we were going to teach them these very words, and disciplinary bridges between the digital project creators and those who might then take them on later as custodial stewards or post-custodial stewards, as it were. And this came in part out of our own heads, but it also came in part out of my teaching of digital preservation. Preserving Digital Culture is the name of the course at Pitt, and I taught it over a number of years and noted, as you all will have noted either actively or passively in your own work, that there are a certain number of buzzwords that truly have caught on, and that there are a number of digital preservation buzzwords which are more functionally useful on a daily basis than others. Unfortunately for us, one of them, for me, for Aisling, Chelsea, and me, one of them is in fact designated community, which is also a very controversial term, especially on the library side of our fence, because to identify designated communities to proactively preserve brings us back to the issues I was bringing up at the beginning of this talk, which is if you are identifying digital designated communities, that means you are also identifying non-designated communities. You are keeping people out proactively by choosing who is in. And in a profession that brings on itself the burden of trying to be everything to everybody, which I say is impossible, designated communities is fraught. It is actually decisively less fraught out in the world of people who are trying to reach particular audiences. Designated communities to a creator is a necessary thing. You have people you are trying to contact. You have people you are trying to address, and we bring into Section A and then also into C this proactive notion of designated community. We teach very carefully about how to identify designated communities, and would you? I was surprised by how quickly the people who participated in the STSR adopted designated community. It was like breathing. They were able to pick this up and run with it. Moreover, this is stuff just so you know, they didn't actually have audiences in mind. In the main, the people that run through the STSR, this is the first time they'd ever that they'd ever been asked to proactively as a group decide who they are talking to, preferably, and who they aren't talking to. The internet is a great I guess, magician in its own way. You think you're putting it up on the internet for everyone, and that can't possibly be the case. We highly encourage people during the STSR to not consider the general public as their audience, as there is no such thing. So, I've made this slide a little bit more complicated because I want to demonstrate that we are practicing what we are preaching, and we are even changing our own adaptation as we learn more. At the top, you'll see this is what we started with a year ago. This is the way we talked about our levels of access in the original Socio-Technical Sustainability Roadmap. And you'll see that the first thing there in level 1 is determine designated communities, and then create and make available descriptive metadata. One of those is common to the NDSA, I believe, and actually they may both be, but they make a whole lot more sense once you've actually asked somebody to sit down and figure out what their designated communities are. We realized, though, about the Brigham Young time of our trip, that we didn't actually ask them to do the other thing. The other phrase that we picked up from the literature that we found to be particularly useful in the context of digital creation was significant properties. Significant properties is a phrase well known to the folks in this room, and you'll see in our adaptation later, we ended up needing to add determined designated communities and significant properties. And let me tell you, the creators are pretty excited to hear, and maybe I'm hoping to feel a small wave of excitement from the people in this room. I say to them, if you walk up to a professional digital steward and you say, here is my project, these were its designated communities, and these are what I consider to be its significant properties, I say the information professional on the other side of that conversation might cry. They might cry, and they would say, give me your stuff. I know it's more complicated than that, but this is the sort of scaffold that we were attempting in one small way to allow what's the base minimum to allow for. This is what I meant by interdisciplinary linguistic conversation. If I can teach significant properties and designated communities as key phrases for them to know and know actually what they mean, it can help make the transition. Should they be, and in this case, what do I say, so lucky as to have their project fall in the hands of the people in this room with 100-year investments and 100-year returns. I could go on. How much time do I have? Actually, I can have a lot of time, but I probably won't. So you'll see here, though, that we focus on publicly available documentation and access and use policies, and then you'll see that our level 2 has something that gets buried now. Our level 2 has something that actually gets buried, I think, in the professional digital preservation models, which is that to have a project that is useful to a project creator, you need to ensure that the designated communities can access the significant properties all the time. And this changes all the time. And this makes, by the end of we run it over 2 days, this makes complete sense to them. And I think it builds a great foundation for sustainability that can be turned into preservation should we wish it to be the case. For those who don't know this project as well as I do, sometimes it's so hard to get out of your own head. There's a case in Section A where we talk about the fact that not every project lives forever, and that we assert that the best way for project creators to think about longevity is to think of it in 3-year increments. Every 3 years, you have to decide again if you're going to give it another 3 years, and every 3 years after that, you're going to decide if you give it another 3 years. And I've said this a number of times, but we thought we were going to get eggs and tomatoes and rotten things thrown at us when we suggested that, and all we get is a sigh of relief. All we get is a sigh of relief. Oh, I only have to plan for the next 3 years? I can do that. I can do that. If you still have pretensions to a 100-year lifespan, we call that book time TM, the same time that books last, which is a very difficult thing to do. And on the STSR, you'll see if your pretensions are in fact book time, we suggest talking to the preservation professionals straight away as part of your initial process to really start building in the resources that it would take to make something last for something as long as a book. We will never, as digital preservation experts, have the same 2,000-year-long history of patronage that book librarians have. So we can't really, that again, it broke it. We can't use that pattern that we had for the paper infrastructure for what we do now. We have to find our own new way. All right, findings. We knew it when we started, but we're academics, so sometimes we think things and then it turns out not to be true. But the socio and socio-technical is perhaps even more critical than the technical when it comes to sustainability practices. When people are making and creating and putting forth their life's blood, their desire to communicate with these communities that they care for so deeply, and to a first approximation, we found that the people who took the time to apply to come do these workshops, to show up and do these workshops, we did give bursaries, so that was good, but they cared so deeply in the communities that they were talking to. That was the real grounded theory code that linked through every single group that came through. This wasn't a group of people just trying to get more grants. It wasn't a group of, these are all stereotypes. It wasn't a group of people just trying to get more grants or just say grandstand about their own opportunities. They were in it to communicate. And it mattered to them deeply that their information wasn't just going to dissipate. This is something we have in this community, something to actually bond over. We have different tools than they do, but they're just as burdened by it. There's a connection between most things in trust class, but there is absolutely a connection between sustainability and trust. People take actions that will promote long-term sustainability when they feel like they can trust that there will be a future, right? We can't really promise them that, but we can promise the way that we step through things. We can step through things in 3-year increments. That matches up for better or for worse with the grant cycle. It matches up for better or for worse with the amount of time undergraduates tend to spend on a project. It matches up against a whole bunch of different other types of cycles. And we just need to trust. We need to trust each other. We need to trust the technologies. We often need to trust large corporations like Microsoft or Google to do our work. And so acknowledging this deep connection between sustainability and trust is important to figuring out how to move forward. And I would like to note, now that I say this out loud in front of this group of august professionals, I don't mean they don't trust digital preservation professionals. That's not what I'm saying here. I think, by and large, most of them worried that their work wasn't important enough to get your attention, much less, it is not a question of trust. I mean trust in the technologies themselves, trust in their deans, trust in their administrators, that sort of trust. All right. This one makes me upset and sad and also sort of happy, because if we could all consider doing this in some of our outreach projects, I think it could make our communities, all of them that we reach, and of all the people in this room, we reach out to any number of diverse, fantastic, small-scale and large-scale communities, which is, of all the comments we got back about in our exit interviews from running the Socio-Technical Sustainability Roadmap, frankly, it almost brought me to tears the number of times project teams said, I am not given enough time to actually talk to my team members and do my job. I don't actually get to do the work that I do because I am so torn doing other administrative tasks or doing other things. Thank you for giving me 2 days to look at other human beings for an extended period of time. It almost was enough just to run it. And you better believe I'm telling the NEH how important it is to actually bring people together face-to-face in local communities. We went all around, I should say. We went to Providence, we went to Provo, we went to Stillwater, Oklahoma, we did one in Pittsburgh, we did one in Atlanta. We were invited by Ben Daigle out to Ohio to do one, and we'll be in Texas in December. Going all around the country to places, so people don't need to all assemble in Tampa, as great as this is, but we can go out to them and figure out how to distribute these resources. This in and of itself makes me want to get up and do this workshop over and over again. But you can do it too. Don't need me. It's all on the internet. In fact, I should say one of our final deliverables is to create a facilitator's manual that will have every single detailed finding that Chelsea and Aisling and I had as a team available as a PDF in all of our PowerPoints. We thought the STSR was enough, and it is not. It's another sort of finding that we learned. So there will be additional materials up for other facilitators. And we're also open to doing train the trainers sessions. There's absolutely more room for discussing how projects end. This notion of book time that I brought up before is important, especially digital humanists, which is sort of my background, as Sybil noted in the introduction. They consider their work often very golden and worthy of endless preservation. And while that is undoubtedly true, the actual resources that it takes to do that are difficult. And so there is room for discussing ending projects. Okay, I'll just give everybody a minute who can read that, and then I'll read it. There is, I am not joking, more space in our infrastructure for teaching records management. Who knew? I taught records management in our MLIS program at Pitt, and I found it endlessly fascinating, and I'm sure so did my students, but it doesn't have the best reputation. Module A5 is a records management module. If you check it out, you'll see. It's not even rapt attention. I get silence. I get note-taking. I get so much attention for my records management lecture, and it's not me, because I've given it to students and they fall asleep. So there is an absolute craving for records management, and I associate this back with my truism that as computers made us do so much more of our own work that used to be the province of professionals, people just they feel they're doing it wrong. I run these within the Department of History of Art and Architecture for our students. There's a moral implication to records management that I think it's important for information management professionals to dispel. You aren't a bad person if your records are a mess. Right? Thank you. It only matters if you can find your stuff. The problem is when you're doing it as a collective, and Module A5 walks through what it takes to go from being an individual record creator to one that has to work in a group in very basic terms. And it's all heuristic. We base it mostly on how we do it in the VMW. There is more space in our infrastructure for records management, and people will appreciate it. I mean, come on, who knew? Thinking of services, free or otherwise, as part of your team has proven to be a useful strategy. This can also help you guys when things come your way to know what part was related, what depended on AWS, what part wasn't, how that actually worked over time. People also don't like to admit how much they depend on the quote-unquote free infrastructure of the internet, but I promise them, and they tell me it's true, but this might be wishful thinking. I promise them that admitting that it's true is less painful than pretending that it's not. And part of the reason is that we talk about things like, all of my project infrastructure relies on GitHub, and if GitHub went away, now mind you, if GitHub went away, we're having bigger issues than just GitHub went away, yeah? It's a little bit more infrastructural than that. But talking about them as red flags rather than problems is critical. Every single project of every single person in this room, every single digital project of every single person in this room has a sustainability red flag. Every single professional digital preservation initiative has a sustainability red flag. And you know what they are and you're watching them. That's what makes them preservation systems. That you know what they are and you're doing something about it. Calling out student labor as a sustainability red flag is also impactful. In the academic market that I tend to talk to, the way that students flow in and out of projects is seen as necessary. That is, in fact, in many digital humanities cases, what the projects are there for. They are there to train students. Students aren't incidental to the project. Students are necessary for the project, but they come and they go, and we want them to go, because we want them to move on to their next thing, yeah? We want them to grow and live and change. That changes the way we think about sustainability practice, and it reemphasizes the 3-year cycle, and it reemphasizes the ongoing change. This is the point at which I often say, think how far we are from OAIS when I'm talking about constant, iterative change. It is difficult to get all the way down to the bit and to produce representation information when we are talking about something that always changes. So the notion of custody and responsibility rears its ugly head. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just trying, this is the way in which I'm trying to deliver on the promise of my talk. Sustainability is not preservation. They're actually two separate mindsets, both important. Calling out grant funding as a sustainability red flag is also impactful. The grantors know it too, and they're starting, of course, to have conversations about it. Every 3 years, writing a new grant takes time away from doing whatever it is that you want to do. It's the way of the world in many ways. It isn't a quote-unquote problem, or you can decide if it's a problem or not, but it is a sustainability red flag. All right. To conclude, forgive a little bit the DH forward quote here, but the TEI, the Text Encoding Initiative, giant XML standard used by a lot of digital humanists who focus on written texts in all languages in their digital humanities work. There's a truism that says that every TEI project is a TEI customization project. Every giant XML schema to actually implement it requires that you basically customize that XML schema almost all the way from the beginning. The digital preservation community should know this as well as anything else. Do you use all of premise, or do you use what is necessary from premise? This is a similar a pattern, or METs or mods. Pick whatever. Sustainability initiatives do things like bake it in that not everybody meets every component of the standard. Digital preservation can do this too, but as a hallmark, I put it to you today, of sustainability initiatives, we bake in the fact that things change and things are always customized, things are always unique. So when it comes to sustainability, why not make the work of this constant iteration and customization visible and supported by the infrastructure? We cannot, as professionals, be everything to everybody. We cannot. It is too burdensome. And then the question of choice and options and who picks what goes in and who pick what gets discarded needs to be a responsibility shared. It needs to be distributed as widely as we can to those who feel they have responsibility. Thus to conclude. It isn't just sustainability that we're all in it together for. Sustainability and preservation are both incredibly hard work, and they should be aligned with our current responsibilities and roles. We don't do preservation work because we care, although we care. We do preservation work because it is our responsibility, and it moves in the same direction as our major work and meaning-making responsibilities. So, they're both hard work, and we are, in fact, all in it together. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you so much, Allison. We have about 15 to 17 minutes for questions. So please make your way up to the mics.
I can lead you through Section A of the STSR if you like. Somebody, quick, ask a question.
Like I'm wearing a cape, that's not my voice though. Hey, I'm Courtney, MUMA, Texas Digital Library Consortium. I am really excited that you brought up records management. I'm pretty much excited whenever anyone brings up records management. But in particular in this context, my mindset and my education very much aligns records management and archival theory.
Yeah.
And I'm not exactly sure how to put this in a way. It's probably going to annoy someone, and I apologize. But OAIS, the way that you presented it, one of the things you said is that the concepts of it can be difficult to grasp because it's kind of saying nothing and everything. Coming from the archival perspective, having been educated in archives, when I saw OAIS, it made sense because it's so based in theory. It was like, oh yeah, check. Mm-hmm. Same with records management. Mm-hmm. So I think you're hitting on something really interesting there when you're finding that kind of feedback about records management and that kind of thirst for it, because it does kind of help that understanding, that deeper understanding of digital preservation. All that to ask, what specifically were people excited about when you were talking about records management? What pieces of that stood out?
Thank you for your question. And yes, that's another good example of seeing your own professionalization. Training in archives is a training in abstraction. Many trainings are. I don't want to call it archives especially that way, but they are that way. Two things that I'll choose to bring forward. One was an easy one. You can see it yourself just so that I don't have to necessarily go through it. But we actually give our file folder structure that we use in the VMW for our digital projects on the STSR website. And so a lot of the questions are literally at the level of what files do you put in these folders? That is, down there, which leads me to part 1A of what I have to say, which then I feel endlessly disappointed in having to tell them, I don't know, what do you do, right? I don't know, what is your project about? Like, what is it that you're trying to do? I have a way to work, and I think it's relatively generalizable. I've seen people actually pick it up. I have seen other people able to use it. But I bet you dollars to donuts, the big buckets look the same, but what they're actually putting in it looks different, as it has to. Because the second thing that I did want to say about what they're interested to hear is that, interested might be the wrong word. They understand it. Is that the only record-keeping system that works in a team is the record-keeping system that the team wants to keep up. There is no way to impose a structure on a team. You have to work with what they have. That means that if you have a team that really likes working with Drive, then Drive should become your reliable site of project documentation. This is a term of art that we put in the STSR, that it doesn't really matter what your reliable sites of project documentation are, so long as your team all agrees that that's what they are. And this is another thing that I feel that has gotten picked up. People, in my experience, participants assume that records management is a problem that can be solved with technical tools. Which website should I use to manage my records? Should I use Drive, or should I use Box, or should I use Dropbox? And as an information professional, I bring to them the sometimes unhappy answer, which is that's actually second to which of these tools is your team willing to use?
Hi, I'm Dennis. I'm with Zontel here. I'm the first time at one of the conferences, so I was pretty excited to hear your elaborations. About 3 years ago, I started to study the standards that came from organizations or group meetings like this, like the OIS or the TRAC, or however you pronounce that.
Sure.
So what my question is, within this pharma sphere, where somehow the available funds are a bit different than within the libraries, it was quite feasible to actually implement a system based on these standards. Now we're in a position that we want to bring this back to this community, and we also want to establish this type of trust that you mentioned at the end. So the question is, what are the procedures that should be taken in order to make sure that this solution that we think adheres to these standards is actually also perceived by you to be compliant with all of these ISO standards?
Okay, so who is me in that scenario now? Just so I answer the question.
I consider you the voice of the group right now. But,
okay, okay.
Yeah.
So let me mirror back the question to make sure that you can feel free to sit, but to make sure I have it right. So you have been lucky to be in a situation where a lot of the highly technical and incredibly detailed and very professional and useful technical standards have been successfully implemented, and you want to know how to best demonstrate the way you did that to a community where that's been less the case, in the hopes that you could make it more the case.
Probably. So
okay.
What I think the real use case would be, you have this chart where you talk about different levels of adhesion to the models. Who classifies the system to fall into one of these categories? Is it a self-assessment? Is this something the community does? Is there a certification agency? What's the procedure there?
Right. The answer is, well, I think if I'm understanding correctly, the answer is each individual institution picks up which standards they feel will promote their needs the best. So the main answer to that question in most American contexts is no one. But I think that report done by the NDSA about track, for example, that was just a survey. They surveyed the membership of this organization, asking how many had taken up the Trusted Digital Repository standards, and they found that only the ones that did either had a really strong, I didn't emphasize this enough, and so I can do it now, thank you. They either had a really demanding stakeholder community, which isn't actually common in my knowledge, although actually, you guys tell me, to have a group of depositors who were absolutely demanding of Trusted Digital Repository status, because it's a lot of work and it's a lot of money for good cause when the information under consideration needs that sort of attention. I think in the main, there's a notion, in the States anyway, that not everything needs that amount of attention, and so then you're in a haves and have-nots situation. Who gets to go into a Trusted Digital Repository and who doesn't? Anyway, they just simply found that outside of having a very demanding user community, and I thought this was essential, the support of each other to do it. It just simply wasn't happening. So I guess I would say, outside of looking for somebody to sort of decide to do things, helping people know why they need these standards at the level that you're suggesting, and supporting them and implementing them in the way that suits them best is the critical thing. Supporting the contextualization of when you need to go deep and when you can stay broad would be the most essential thing you could bring to bear from your experience. When do you really need to get down to the brass tacks, the real small scale things, and when can you let it go? Is something that I think more advice from people who've actually done it could really help. I hope that answers.
Hi, so thank you for your presentation. I kind of wanted to follow up on like the demanding communities who, want the track. Like, we've never had that, but we've had people come to us and say like, well, your repository doesn't support reuse or interoperability. So I'm wondering if in your trekking around the STSR, if that emerged as a concern or anything related to that?
Yeah, thank you. We had, I should say that sometimes when we took the STSR around, I had only project creators, and they wouldn't have known to ask that question, in the main. But when we went out to Ohio for Bendagel and the Ohio 5, I had a lot more information professionals in the room. And frankly, running the STSR, like if we all did really do Section A in here on projects that you held, it would be a very different conversation than project creators, because I would get get questions directly like this. So in the small number of cases where I had questions like that, the actual issue at hand was one of service. I've heard a bunch of times today about libraries changing from a collections model to a service model. And I would say that in the main, I think that's why that committee brought it up. The answer to your question is no, because the stakeholders didn't know to demand it, or don't know that that's something in the offing, or don't know that it's necessary. And in that way, I wonder, I'm just thinking this out loud, if that might not be such a great conversation to have, because it can check you, talking back about when you would go ahead and do the expense of doing something like Trusted Digital Repository. Not just talking about what they need, but how, the cost-benefits analysis of doing it. So I would say the information professionals that I spoke to are a lot more concerned. We're also happy about the 3-year cycle, and we're a lot more concerned about maintaining active usability and much less in cold storage, which is how I may be wrong. That's how I consider these standards, because they aren't geared towards access, because they aren't geared towards making things more available. They're geared more towards more storage. So the answer to your question is not much, but when they do, they're more worried about user communities that have much more smaller scale aspirations. Smaller time scale. The projects themselves think of themselves as very important, because they are.
Speaking of access and standards for access, the timing is perfect because that draft of access that Shira Peltzman for the NDSA levels, a group of us from DLF have been working on revising that for the past couple of years and expanding it, and we just put it out for publication and edits yesterday. I think several of us are in the room, and we'd really value your feedback on it, particularly like the language and things like that. So it's great to see that there's interest. Thank you.
Yeah, great, no problem. Thanks, I'll check it out.
Great. Thank you very much, Allison. That was a fantastic keynote.